gains you've won.
Annelise Orleck, explain what happened on that fateful day on March 25th, 1911. Why were these workers locked out and in?
Well, the owners of the Triangle Company, Harris and Blank, claimed that they had a problem with theft, and so they locked the door out of which most of the workers left to supposedly to prevent them from taking fabric and stealing from the company. Afterwards, when it came to trial, the owners admitted that the most they might possibly have lost was $15 and $20 a year. So that's the number that ultimately cost all of those workers' lives. There were no smoking signs in the factory, but the cutters, who were kind of the elite in the shop, were known to ignore that, and perhaps one of them did. It's not clear exactly what happened, but someone flicked an ash, and it caught in what was probably more than a ton of fabric scraps. There had been more than 100,000 shirtwaists made since the last time the manufacturers had cleaned scraps out of the shop. And the young women, it's worth picking up on what Steve said, had been warning about those scraps. They'd been warning about them for months. There were hundreds of complaints on file at the Women's Trade Union League about the dangers of these factories and the likelihood that fire would start. And indeed, there had been a lethal fire in Newark just a few months before the Triangle Fire that killed 26 young women and injured many others. So they were aware of this danger, and what happened was even worse than they could have predicted. The fire spread through the grass linen out of which the shirtwaists were made. It was very flammable, and it spread so quickly and so horribly and with so much heat that there were actually skeletons of young women at their sewing machines who were discovered after the fire. So some never made it away from their desks. Others tried to leave. There were two doors to the factory. One was blocked by flames. The other one was probably locked, and that was the reason that so many were left with the horrible choice of either perishing in fire or jumping out the window. Some of them rushed out onto the fire escape, about 25 of them. There were already people from the 8th floor on the fire escape. It collapsed, and that was the first terrible scene of death that New Yorkers witnessed from below. But in a way even more awful, you can't judge these things, but was this revelation that Frances Perkins later described, that what had first appeared to be fabric that the manufacturers were throwing out the window, people thought they were trying to save their good fabric. People soon realized we're workers, young women, a few young men. And within a half hour, many hundreds, if not thousands, on the street below had watched this carnage and really vividly experienced the terror. In the aftermath, they experienced a different kind of terror, which was that the bodies of the young workers lay on the streets for several days as New Yorkers came by to try to identify their loved ones. And that makeshift morgue almost made the whole city feel like a makeshift morgue. Eventually, it was moved to the 26th Street Pier, and again, for days, New Yorkers were treated to images of family members grieving, collapsing, coming out from having tried to identify their lost loved ones.
And who these women were?
Well, I think that's the most important thing to remember, because there have been so many tragedies in the 20th century. The question is always, why has this one attracted so much attention? Why has it still moved so many people? These women were the strikers of 1909, 1910, and they had gotten a lot of coverage in the press. And they had been quoted, sometimes 50 and 60 and 17-year-old girls talking about their constitutional rights and their rights to picket without being beaten, and marching on City Hall with banners in Yiddish and Italian and English saying, "We are not slaves," and abolish slavery. And they were saucy. The management had attempted to put prostitutes on the line to sully the reputations of these girls. And instead of them saying, "Oh, no, 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 we're not prostitutes, don't mistake us," they said, "Better to be a streetwalker than a scab. It's an honest profession." So they had attracted the attention and the affection of the city, and as Steve pointed out, many people who had not previously been sympathetic to labor began to shift their views. Even the New York Times, which had been staunchly anti-labor, began to cover the strikers with a little bit more sympathy. Partly it was the violence that was leveled against them. The leader of the strike, Clara Lemlich, had 6 ribs broken by clubs during the course of the strike. There were girls who were dragged off with bloodied heads in bandages, and at first that didn't win sympathy. One judge, when a girl was dragged before him with a head covered in blood, said, "You are on strike against God and nature." Right? Women shouldn't be out parading themselves like this.
And what happened to the 2 owners of the factory, and what kind of penalties did they receive?
The trial was an interesting trial because it's the flip side of the kind of heroic imagery that you saw of these young women before the fire during the strike. The trial was really an exercise in putting them on trial. In a sense, they were described as prone to panic, hysterical. Their deaths were basically attributed to that hysteria and that panic. It was said that they had rushed to the door and blocked the door, and that's why.
Who were they?
Who were the girls?
The workers, the owners.
Harris and Blank, Isaac Harris and Max Blank. They were German Jews. They had been in the country a little while longer than the workers, which was typical of these garment shops, although this one was bigger. They certainly had more capital to invest than the owners of little sweatshops, which were kind of fly-by-night, rented by the week. But that said, they still had family working in the shops. They lost family in the shops, and they lost family in the fire. So they were not completely removed from the garment trade themselves. Nevertheless, they hired a very flashy New York attorney, Max Stoyer, who was one of these celebrity defense attorneys, and he
attempted to blame the victims for panicking.
He did, and he accused them of perjury. He soft-pedaled it. He said they couldn't remember. Maybe they were so hysterical that they couldn't remember what had happened to them. He brought on a wave of witnesses who had worked with the company at different times and said they had seen the door open, not that day, but that they had come in and out of the door. And one juror later said they believed the door was locked, but the defense attorney had introduced enough reasonable doubt. And interestingly enough, even the prosecutor called the girls less intelligent than the norm.